Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, where we are studying the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Currently, we are in First Chronicles, chapter 13. No, 14. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. And going through the life of David, the administration of David. We're going to see more of the spiritual side of, David. So let's get right into it. Excuse me. Chapter 14. It says, King Hiram of Tyre sent envoys to David along with cedar, logs, stonemasons, and carpenters to build a palace for him. Now, later we're going to see David. He's going to come back, and Hiram was going to send him some materials in preparation for the temple that God is not going to allow him to build. But this is his palace, and it's going to be interesting because I want to keep this in note that David's going to build a fabulous palace, but there's going to be something interesting that comes from that. It's attitude meaning. All right, verse 2. Then David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that his kingdom had been exalted for the sake of his people, Israel. In other words, at this point, David's he's established a lot of the threats, especially the internal threats. You have to keep this in mind. Remember, in Samuel tells us that there was constant war between the house of Saul and the house of David. He's kind of enjoying the peace now as king over all of Israel. Verse 3, David took more wives in Jerusalem. Now, he had ruled 7 years in Kidron, and then now he is in Jerusalem, and he is king over all of Israel. So he took more wives in Jerusalem. And he became the father of more sons and daughters. These are the names of the children born to him in Jerusalem. Shemaiah, Shabbat, Nathan, Solomon, Isbah, Elihu, Ilpatet, Nag, Nepheg, Japhia, Elashmiah, Bealidiah, and Elipheleti. I know that's, again, forgive me for butchering these names, but you would notice Solomon. Now, remember, the writer is writing this after the Babylon exile. So this is why you probably see the name of Solomon, because probably during the time period here, Solomon's not born yet. All right, verse 8. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over all of Israel, they all went in search of David. And when David heard of this, he went out to face them. Now, I have to admit, David was a bad dude. As I said, we saw in the last study the exploits of David's army. In other words, you had to be bad dude to be a part of his 30. You had the army, but then you had the immediate, the elite, right? And David, you can say David was no punk. So David, wait a minute, what? They're marching against us? Joab? Let's roll. Let's roll, right? Now the Philistines, verse 9, had come and raided the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of God, should I go to war against the Philistines, and will you hand them over to me? Now, this would be one of David's signature here, that he will seek the mind of God, even though he had a great army, even though things are going good for him. As I said, there's certain things he didn't do which he should have done in the matter of bringing the ark. Okay, but notice he asked God, should he go up and fight? The Lord required, go and I will hand them over to you. So the Israelites went up to Baal Perizim, and David defeated the Philistines there. And then David said, like a bursting flood, God has used me to burst out against my enemies. Therefore they named the place the Lord burst out. The Philistines abandoned their idols there, and David ordered that they be burned in the fire. And once again, the Philistines raided in the valley, so David again inquired of God, and God answered him, do not pursue them directly, circle around them and attack them opposite the balsam trees. And when you hear the sound of the marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then march out in battle, for God will have marched out ahead of you to attack the camp of the Philistines. So David did exactly as God commanded him, and they struck down the Philistines at Gerber Jezer. And then David's fame spread throughout the land, and the Lord caused all the nations to be terrified of him. Now, verse 1, chapter 15. David built a house for himself in the city of David. Now, let me say one other thing before I move on. These military exploits of David that we see here are noteworthy because, one, he sought God. Two, God always made him to conquer, but then they will also be why God will tell him you can't build the temple. Alright, verse 1. David built a house for himself in the city of David, and he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it. This would be the tabernacle. Verse 2. Then David said, no one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, because the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister before him. So apparently David went back and actually read the law of Moses, because that's exactly where he messed up at. It should have been the Levites who carried the ark. Verse 3. David assembled all of Israel at Jerusalem to bring the ark of the Lord to the place he prepared for it. Then he gathered together the descendants of Aaron and Levites, from Kother, Uri, the leaders of 120 of his relatives, from the Merat, Asai, the leader of 220 of his relatives, from Goshen, Joel, the leader of 130 of his relatives, from the Eliphites, Shimei, the leader of 200 of his relatives, the Hemrites, Eli, the leader of 100, and his relative, from the Uzzites, Amminadab, and the leader of 112 of his relatives. David summoned the priests Zadok and Abiathar, and the Levites Uri, Azai, Joel, Shimei, Eli, and Amminadab. He said to them, you are the head of the Levite family. You are the head of the Levite families. You and your relative must consecrate yourselves so that you may bring the ark of the Lord God of Israel to the place I have prepared for it. For the Lord our God burst out in anger against us because you Levites were not with us at the first time, for we didn't inquire of him about the proper procedure. So again, admitting his mistake, he didn't inquire of God. He had a good heart, but he did it, and it cost, of course, a life of one man. So the priests and the Levites, verse 14, the priests and the Levites consecrated themselves to bring up the ark of the Lord God of Israel. Then the Levites carried the ark of God the way Moses had commanded according to the word of the Lord, on their shoulders with the poles. And David took the leaders of the Levites to appoint their relatives as singers, and to have them raise their voices with joy, accompanied by musical instruments, harp, lyre, and cymbals. Now I want to stop and do a little sidebar here, because one of the things that's amazing to me when you come to, there are some people in right now, denominations that say that the church should not have musical instruments. One of the denominations is the Church of Christ. Okay, Church of Christ churches. Churches of Christ churches are autonomous churches, but they are big denominations. So whether they say, even though they are autonomous, trust me, they all march by the same orders. And one of the things is water baptism. You got to be baptized in water in order to be saved. But the other thing is musical instruments, and that's kind of strange. But as denominations go, this is what happens. You get a group of men that sit back and go, oh, God says no musical instruments. And they are steadfast on that. And I'm bringing this up because if you think about this right here you see the singers and the musical instruments. And without no reason that they give, that God would say, okay, it's okay to have them here. We're going to pause doing the church age and then pick them back up in heaven. All right, and I digress. Verse 17, so the Levites appointed Herman, son of Joel, from his relatives, Ashfather, son of Bercher, from their relatives, and the Merarites, Ethan, son of Cushaniah, with all their relatives. Second to Zechariah, Zael, Shimeath, Zero, Ino, Eliab, Benaniah, Mathani, Ephraim, forgive this, and again, Micaniah, and again, forgive the bad pronunciations here, because I know that was complete butchering. He said, and the gatekeepers, Obadiah and Janeel. The singers, Herman, Asaph. Now, when you read through the book of Psalms, take note of that name, Asaph. You see it a lot. And Ethan, were to sound the bronze cymbals. Zechariah, Israel, Shemo, Zimo, Eliab, Messaniah, and Benaniah were to play harps according to Amamoth. Mathaniah, Ether, Michael, Ebodium, all these names were to lead the music with lyres according to Shammah. So again, one of the things here, besides me butchering these names here, is the fact that again you had complete, we would call them today full orchestra band. You kind of see that sometimes one of the headlines of modern day churches is that come join us with worship. We got a full orchestra, a full band, worship with full orchestra and band. In other words, the fact that these people make a difference about music is just astounding to me. Verse 22, Shemaiah, the leader of the Levites in music, was to direct the music because he was skillful. Baranachah and Elkanah were to be gatekeepers for the ark. The priests, Shebaniah, Zaphaniah, Nethiel, Amonasai, Zechariah, Eli were to blow the trumpets before the ark of the Lord. Obadiah and Jonah were also to be gatekeepers for the ark. And David and the elders of Israel and the commanders of 1,000 went with rejoicing to bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the house of Obadiah, while the Levites were carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. With God's help, they sacrificed 7 bulls and 7 rams. So it's kind of interesting now when you have the help of God versus not having the help of God. Verse 27, now David was dressed in a robe of fine linen, as were all of the Levites who were carrying the ark, as well as the singers, and Chenaniah, the music leader, the music leader of the singers. David also wore the linen ephod. So all of Israel brought up the ark of the covenant of the Lord with shouts and the sound of ram's horn and trumpets and the cymbals and the playing of the harps and the lyre. As the ark of the covenant of the Lord was entering the city of David, Saul's daughter Michal looked down from the window and saw King David dancing and celebrating, and she despised him in her heart. Now there's a couple of things about this that is troubling. So if you remember the story, when God chose David, David was tending the sheep, and Saul had messed up because he was a bad person in heart. So God said through Samuel, I'm turning the kingdom from you, I'm going to give it to David. Samuel comes and anoints David. As David grows, and David was a teenager at the time, And it wouldn't be for another like 13 years, something like that, before David actually became king at the age of 30. And that's why during that time it was a very tumultuous time for David. He was on the run. But when he, after he killed Goliath and he was enlisted in Saul's service, Saul was going to give him his first daughter, but then Micah loved David. Again, David was a very extremely handsome person. When I say David was the man, he was a man of man, right? Men want to be him, women wanted to have him, marry him. He was wise, he was just, he was extremely handsome, did I say right? He was a military man. I mean, he was just, okay, when you want to picture a man, David was it. And of course, the women liked it, David. And so eventually he ended up marrying Micah, Saul's daughter. And then Saul tried to use Micah to try to get to get her to turn against David. But she never did. But Micah, being the daughter of Saul, is kind of interesting because she was never a godly woman. In other words, so if you want to say the person who would say, would she be a good wife? She was never a good wife. One of the clues we have with her was when David was on the run, she dressed up one of her idols to hide. She put goat hair on him. My point is that kind of shows her heart. Now, later, after David was on the run, Saul gave Micah to another man, and then they end up with whatever, living the life, right? That's the way it was with women. Women did not have, as one of the old commercials says, women have come a long way, okay? And the phrase was, "You come a long way, baby." Actually, it was a cigarette commercial, but I digress. So, after David became king, he does, again, you go back to 2 Samuel. Remember, we kind of get this picture of the politics of it. Here we didn't see it here, that when David comes to the throne, he sends for her. He goes, "Go get my wife." Saul gave it to her. That was my wife. It was kind of a pathetic scene because the guy loved Micah, and he's kind of walking behind, and then I think it was Saul's uncle turned around and go, "Man, you better go back for you get dealt with." And so we kind of see here the attitude of Micah, that in this celebration of the ark, she's looking up in her windows. The question is, why isn't she down there with the celebration? And it almost seems like there was some animosity. We're going to get to this later, but he tells her, because she confronts him and goes, "Oh man, didn't you look all, whatever, and glorious, in front of the women?" Because as David is dancing, his clothes come loose and all that kind of stuff, and his undergarments were exposed. And he kind of snaps on it and goes, "Well, I'm going to dance like a fool in front of the God who chose me over your father." Anywho, Micah's not a good woman, her heart, So anyway, we see that, and one of the things was that Micah would be, cursed for the rest of her life. She wouldn't have children, which of course during that time was a big, it was a bad thing when you can produce children, and it was even worse if you didn't produce sons. That's just the way life was back then. All right, guys, look. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. Remember, all comments are welcome. Hit that subscribe button. I will see you in the next study.